The crowd roared like thunder, their voices merging into an electrifying symphony of chaos and excitement. The air inside the arena was thick with tension, a palpable energy that sent shivers down the spines of every spectator in attendance. Millions were watching worldwide, eyes glued to their screens, waiting for a showdown that had been building for months. This wasn't just any wrestling match, this was personal. On one side of the ring stood Conor, a fearless fighter known for his relentless determination, explosive energy, and an unshakable will to win. Across from him, staring daggers through the ropes, was Sharapudtin, a monstrous force of nature, a man whose name sent chills through the locker room, a wrestler feared for his brutal tactics and cold, calculating mind. Neither had anything left to prove, yet tonight, everything was on the line. The animosity between them had started long before this moment. It had begun with a single insult, a challenge thrown down in front of millions. What had started as a simple rivalry escalated into something much more dangerous, a war that could only be settled inside the squared circle. Conor had always been known for his sharp tongue, but this time, his words had cut too deep. Sharapudtin took it personally, and when he took something personally, there was no telling how far he would go. The backstage ambushes, the unexpected attacks during interviews, the mind games. Sharapudtin had done everything in his power to make Conor regret ever speaking his name. But Conor wasn't the type to back down. Every punch he took only fueled his fire. Every cheap shot only made him more determined. Tonight, it all came to a head. The lights dimmed for just a moment before the first entrance theme hit, shaking the foundation of the arena. The crowd erupted as Conor stepped onto the stage, his expression unreadable, his body tense like a coiled spring ready to explode. His fists clenched at his sides as he made his way down the ramp, every step echoing his resolve. The cheers of his fans were deafening, but beyond them, he could hear the jeers, the doubters, the ones who believed Sharapudtin was unstoppable. He didn't care. He thrived on the pressure. And then the atmosphere shifted. The second entrance theme blared through the speakers, a slow, menacing sound that sent a wave of unease through the audience. Sharapudtin emerged from the shadows, his towering frame cutting through the lights like a nightmare made flesh. His eyes locked onto Conor, unblinking, devoid of emotion. There was no smile, no arrogance, just pure, calculated intent. The closer he got to the ring, the more the crowd seemed to shrink under his presence. He didn't run, didn't rush. He moved with the deliberate confidence of a man who believed with every fiber of his being that he had already won. The referee barely had time to signal the start before Conor exploded forward, throwing the first punch with the force of someone who'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. It connected cleanly, snapping Sharaputtin's head to the side, but he barely flinched. A slow, unsettling grin crept across his face, and in the blink of an eye, he countered with a thunderous blow that sent Conor sprawling. The impact echoed through the arena, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The match had begun, and already it was clear this wasn't going to be a technical showcase, a battle of strategy and finesse. This was a war, raw and unfiltered, a fight that would push both men to their absolute limits. With every passing second, the intensity grew. Conor fought with the speed of a man who had everything to prove, ducking and weaving, landing sharp, calculated strikes. But Sharapudtin was a juggernaut, absorbing the blows like they were nothing, delivering devastating counters that shook the very ring. The crowd was on their feet, unable to look away, each move drawing gasps and cheers in equal measure. Every time it seemed like one had the upper hand, the other would find a way to shift the momentum. Neither man was willing to fall. But then, Just when it seemed like Conor was gaining the upper hand, something changed. Sharapudtin caught him mid-motion, lifting him high above his head with terrifying ease. The audience knew what was coming before it even happened. A devastating slam shook the ring, sending a shockwave of silence through the arena. Conor lay motionless for a split second that felt like an eternity, and Sharapudtin, standing over him, let out a slow, deep breath. He could end it right there. One pinfall, and it would be over. But he didn't go for the cover. No, he wanted to make a statement. He wanted to break Conor, not just beat him. As he stepped back, preparing for another devastating attack, Conor's fingers twitched. His breathing was heavy, but there was something in his eyes, something dangerous, something defiant. The kind of fire that didn't just fade away. The kind of fire that only burned brighter when pushed to the edge. And as Sharapudtin loomed over him, ready to strike, Conor did something that no one in the arena expected. He smiled. The audience barely had time to react before Conor moved, a burst of energy from seemingly nowhere. In an instant, everything shifted. The tides were about to turn, and no one, especially Sharapudtin, was ready for what was coming next. Conor's sudden resurgence sent a shockwave through the crowd, their voices swelling into a deafening roar as he twisted his body and broke free from Sharaputtin's grip with an agility that defied the punishment he had taken. He landed on his feet, his breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts, his mind racing with possibilities. Sharaputtin's expression flickered for the briefest moment, not fear, not hesitation, but something close to curiosity. No one had ever stood up to him like this. No one had taken that kind of impact and come back swinging with fire still in their eyes. But Conor had been fighting his entire life. Long before he stepped into this ring, long before the bright lights and roaring fans, he had learned to take hits that could break men twice his size. Wrestling wasn't just a career to him, it was survival. He had clawed his way up from the underground circuits, where respect was earned in blood and sweat. He had fought opponents who were stronger, faster, and more ruthless, but he had never met anyone like Sharapudtin. This wasn't just a physical battle, it was psychological warfare. Sharaputtin's rise to dominance had been meteoric, but it wasn't without its shadows. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was an enigma, a force that seemed to appear out of nowhere. There were whispers in the locker room, stories about his past that didn't add up. Some claimed he had been trained in isolation, forged in brutal underground fights where rules didn't exist. Others swore he had ties to powerful figures pulling the strings behind the scenes, ensuring that he remained untouchable. What was undeniable, however, was that no one had ever bested him in a one-on-one match. Conor had studied every match Sharapudtin had ever fought, looking for a weakness, a single flaw in his seemingly invincible style. But every time it seemed like someone had him figured out, he would evolve, adapt, and crush them before they had the chance to capitalize. He was a machine, cold, calculated, relentless. And yet, standing face to face with him now, Conor saw something that the others had missed. It wasn't an obvious weakness, not something physical or technical. It was in the way Sharapudtin carried himself, the way he reacted to unexpected resistance. He was used to controlling the pace, to dictating every moment of the match. When that control slipped, when someone refused to break, that's when cracks began to form. The match raged on, each exchange more brutal than the last. Conor's speed and resilience kept him in the fight, while Sharaputtin's raw power threatened to end it at any moment. The energy in the arena was electric, feeding into both men as they pushed themselves beyond their limits. Every strike, every counter, every near fall sent the crowd into a frenzy, but beneath the spectacle, something deeper was unfolding. This wasn't just about pride or championships anymore. There was an unspoken battle of wills, a challenge that went beyond mere competition. Backstage, the tension was just as thick. Behind the curtain, a group of wrestlers and officials watched the monitor in stunned silence. Many had placed bets, some literal, some figurative, on the outcome of this match, but no one had expected it to go like this. A few had quietly been hoping Conor would be the one to finally expose Sharaputtin's vulnerabilities, but others weren't so sure. There were rumors that Sharaputtin wasn't just fighting for himself tonight. Some suspected that powerful forces were invested in his continued reign, forces that didn't take kindly to disruptions. Then there was the matter of the anonymous messages. Conor had started receiving them weeks before the match. Cryptic warnings telling him to back down, to let this fight go. At first, he thought they were from Sharaputtin himself, part of his mind games, but the more he read, the more he realized something else was at play. The messages weren't threats, they were warnings. Someone out there knew something he didn't, and they were trying to keep him from walking into something bigger than just a match. But Conor didn't believe in fate. Didn't believe in backing down just because someone told him to. He had spent his life fighting against the odds, and he wasn't about to stop now. Whatever was lurking beneath the surface of this match, whatever forces were moving in the shadows, he would deal with it when the time came. Right now, all that mattered was the man standing in front of him, the immovable object that he was determined to break. Sharaputtin, for his part, could feel the match slipping into unfamiliar territory. He had expected to dominate, to dismantle Conor piece by piece, like he had done to every opponent before him. But Conor wasn't following the script. He wasn't staying down when he should have. He wasn't breaking like everyone else. And for the first time in a long time, Sharaputtin felt something dangerous creeping into the back of his mind: uncertainty. The next sequence happened so fast that even the crowd seemed to hold their breath. Conor feinted left, baiting Sharaputtin into overcommitting, and in that split-second opening, he struck with pinpoint precision. A sharp, devastating shot to the ribs, followed by a lightning-quick takedown that sent Sharaputtin crashing to the mat. The arena erupted as Conor scrambled to his feet, sensing an opportunity, his instincts screaming at him to press the advantage. But before he could move, something changed. Sharaputtin wasn't getting up, not right away. He was on his back, motionless for just a fraction longer than usual. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Conor saw it. The way his chest rose and fell a little heavier than before, the flicker of something behind his eyes. Pain. Real pain. For the first time in his career, Sharaputtin had been hurt. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. In an instant, Sharaputtin rolled to his feet, his face expressionless, his body moving like a man who hadn't just taken one of the hardest hits of his life. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The crowd sensed it. Conor sensed it. And deep down, he knew whatever had just happened, whatever wall he had managed to break through, the real fight was only about to begin. The moment Sharaputtin got back to his feet, something felt different. The way he stood, the way his shoulders squared, the way his breath steadied. He was still the same towering force, but there was a shift in the air, something just beneath the surface. Conor had hit him harder than anyone ever had, and for a brief moment, the illusion of invincibility had cracked. But instead of showing weakness, Sharaputtin locked eyes with him, and that eerie calm returned. It wasn't rage or desperation, it was something worse. It was focus. Conor knew he had struck a nerve, but instead of retreating, he pressed forward, charging at Sharaputtin with the kind of fearless aggression that had made him famous. He ducked a wild swing and drove a knee straight into his opponent's midsection, feeling the impact reverberate through his own bones. Sharapudtin staggered back, just slightly, but that was all Conor needed. He followed up with a lightning-fast series of strikes, each one more precise than the last. The crowd was on their feet, screaming for him to finish it, but deep down, he knew this wasn't going to be that easy. Then, without warning, Sharapudtin moved. It wasn't just a counter, it was an explosion. He caught Conor mid-strike, gripping his wrist like a steel vice, and in the blink of an eye, he spun him around and launched him into the corner with such force that the ring rope shuddered. Conor barely had time to register what was happening before a massive forearm smashed into his jaw, rattling his skull. He slumped for just a second, his vision blurring at the edges, but he forced himself to stay upright. He had come too far to fall now. Outside the ring, the atmosphere was tense. The officials were whispering among themselves, exchanging uneasy glances. This match was going longer than expected, longer than any of Sharaputtin's usual victories. And that wasn't all. Backstage, in the control room, a figure sat watching the monitors with a clenched jaw, his fingers drumming against the desk. He was someone rarely seen on camera, someone who operated in the background, making decisions that shaped careers and controlled outcomes. And right now, what he was seeing did not fit into his plan. Conor had been warned. The messages, the cryptic signals someone had been trying to tell him that this fight wasn't just about the two men in the ring. There were forces at play here, bigger than rivalries, bigger than championships. Sharapudtin wasn't just a wrestler. He was an investment, an asset. And assets didn't lose unless they were told to. But Conor didn't care about any of that. As he shook off the pain and pulled himself out of the corner, he locked eyes with Sharapudtin once again, and this time, he saw something flicker, something raw, something unguarded. He wasn't supposed to have made it this far. He wasn't supposed to still be standing. And that meant, for the first time in a long time, Sharapudtin was facing something unfamiliar. The tension boiled over as they clashed again, bodies colliding with enough force to shake the entire ring. Every move was sharper, every counter more brutal. Sweat dripped from their bodies, breaths came in ragged gasps, but neither man slowed. The crowd was witnessing something special, something beyond scripted entertainment. This was real. This was personal. Then, just when it seemed like Conor was finally gaining control, something happened that no one, least of all him, expected. The lights flickered. Not the usual dramatic dimming for effect, but a sudden, jarring disturbance that sent a ripple of confusion through the audience. The massive screens above the arena glitched, static flashing for just a moment before a grainy, distorted image appeared. It was an old match, one that had never been aired. The footage was raw, unpolished, and the figure in the ring, barely recognizable through the grainy video, was unmistakably Sharapudtin. But it wasn't a WWE match. It wasn't even from any known wrestling promotion. The footage showed something underground, something brutal. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The screen went black, the lights stabilized, and the confusion was replaced with murmurs, speculation, tension. Inside the ring, Sharaputtin's reaction was immediate. His head snapped toward the screen, his body going rigid. For the first time all night, his mask of cold detachment cracked, and Conor saw something he had never seen in him before: fear. It was fleeting, gone in the blink of an eye, but it had been there. And in that moment, Conor knew that whatever had just happened, it had changed everything. The referee hesitated, unsure whether to call the match, but Sharapudtin turned back toward Conor, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he lunged, his attacks more frantic, less calculated. Conor barely dodged, rolling under a wild strike and coming up behind him, his mind racing. What was on that footage? Why did it shake Sharapudtin? And more importantly, who had played it? Backstage, the man in the control room stood up, his face dark. Someone had just interfered in something much bigger than a wrestling match. And for the first time, the outcome of this fight was no longer in his hands. Sharapudtin charged at Conor with a fury that was different from before, less controlled, more desperate. His strikes were wild, erratic, fueled by something beyond mere competition. Conor ducked under a brutal swing, his instincts sharper now, his mind racing. Whatever had flashed on that screen had shaken Sharapudtin to his core. For the first time in the match, the monster in front of him looked human, vulnerable. That meant there was a way to win. The audience was on the edge of their seats, the energy in the arena electric. They had seen countless matches before, but this one was different. It wasn't just about a title or bragging rights anymore. This was about truth. About a man fighting not only an opponent, but the forces that had been trying to control the outcome from the very beginning. Conor could feel it in his bones. Something bigger was happening here. And he was right in the middle of it. Sharapudtin swung again, but Conor sidestepped and countered with a devastating kick to the ribs, the same spot he had targeted earlier. This time, Sharapudtin felt it. He staggered, his footing unsteady for just a second, and Conor seized the opportunity. He launched himself off the ropes, using every last ounce of energy he had left, and delivered a flying knee straight to Sharaputtin's jaw. The impact sent the giant stumbling backward, arms flailing, before he collapsed to one knee. The crowd erupted, a mix of disbelief and excitement. No one had ever brought Sharapudtin to his knees before. Not like this. Conor's entire body ached, his vision swimming from exhaustion, but he knew this was his moment. He sprinted forward, ready to deliver the final blow, but just as he leaped, everything changed. The lights cut out completely, plunging the arena into darkness. A stunned silence fell over the crowd, broken only by murmurs of confusion. Then, a single spotlight flickered to life, illuminating the ring where Sharapudtin still knelt. Conor stood just feet away, his muscles tensed, his breath heavy. The referee, who had been caught in the chaos, glanced around, unsure of what to do. Then, a voice echoed through the speakers. Low, distorted, unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The crowd erupted in confusion, heads turning toward the massive screen above the stage. Static crackled, then the same grainy footage from before flashed back on the screen. This time, it played longer. It showed Sharapudtin in a brutal, unsanctioned underground fight, the kind of match that didn't follow any rules. But it wasn't just the violence that sent a ripple of shock through the audience. It was what happened after. The match in the footage ended, but instead of celebrating his victory, Sharapudtin looked toward the camera. A figure stepped into the frame beside him, face blurred, voice muffled. But the message was clear. From now on, you don't lose. You understand? The video cut out, and just like that, the lights returned. But the energy in the arena had shifted completely. The air was thick with realization, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. Sharapudtin had never been undefeated because of his skill alone. There had been forces ensuring his victories from the start. The man in the control room, the one who had been watching from the shadows, had been pulling the strings all along. And someone, whoever had leaked that footage, had just exposed it all. Sharaputtin's expression was unreadable as he slowly stood, his breathing heavy. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to argue. He just looked at Conor, his jaw clenched, as if he had known all along that this moment was coming. But what he hadn't expected was how it would feel. The weight of the truth. The realization that, for all his strength, he had never truly been in control of his own career. Conor took a step forward, his fists still clenched, ready for whatever was coming next. But Sharapudtin didn't move. He just stared at him for a long moment. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he did something no one had ever seen him do before. He nodded. Then, without warning, he turned and walked out of the ring. No cheap shot. No last-ditch attack. Just silence. The crowd was in an uproar, unsure whether to boo or cheer. The referee stood frozen, uncertain of what to do. But Conor understood. The match was over. In the control room, the man who had been watching everything slammed his fist against the table, his carefully built empire crumbling in real time. Whoever had leaked that footage had done more than expose Sharapudtin, they had exposed him. And he knew this wasn't over. Back in the ring, Conor exhaled, letting the weight of everything that had happened finally sink in. He hadn't just won a match, he had broken something much bigger. The system that had been rigged from the start, the illusion of dominance, the people pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And as he stood in the center of the ring, the crowd roaring around him, he knew one thing for sure.